One of these days, Alice. You know,
we know whose child you are.
I'm like a nobody who doesn't know anything.
These are real people who really wrote Richard Dawkins this?
This is my conclusion.
It has to be true. You have to have it as your previous video.
This is part of your apologetic.
now I know a ton more.
This is a mission statement.
Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. We're going to talk about everything wrong with Christian apologetics. But we're going to talk about some things. This is going to be a fun discussion. You're going to want to stay tuned. All sorts of nuggets are going to come out in this from two academics. We have Dr. Joshua Bowen, an Assyriologist. And you could say, wouldn't you call yourself somewhat of a Hebrew Bible scholar in a way?
I mean, I'd let somebody else do that.
Okay. But you wouldn't put that on your, a CV,
I have a minor in Hebrew Bible and my PhD, and I got a master's in theology and Old Testament studies. So whatever that means.
You got a 3-time PhD in apologetics, right?
I mean, that's
And then we got Dr. Kill here. He has 17 bodies on him. They're invisible teardrops.
Invisible teardrops. Yes.
Yeah, because I see the bandana and we know what that means. And then the symbol on your shirt.
Yeah,
so we know whose child you are. You're obviously a Dead Sea Scroll scholar.
Obviously.
And Hebrew Bible scholar. I definitely categorize that, especially with our conversations about where a Dead Sea Scrolls scholar is situated in that kind of conversation.
Well, my degree says religions and theology, though. So, depending on who you talk to, I'm like a nobody who doesn't know anything.
Another
fake degree from
PhD in apologetics, of course.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to talk about these apologetics today. You've done a documentary actually responding about Josh McDowell's narrative.
Yeah.
We've talked before, and both you, off air, Dr. Josh, and Kipp, have brought up the idea in our previous recording about apologists start with their conclusion. And they get upset when that gets called out online. In fact, they try to say, no, we don't. Quit saying we start with our conclusion. It's the evidence that we're going for. So let's spearhead this as we approach the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to say from the outset, I don't know of any way that somebody can come to data without an interpretive framework. Mm-hmm. You just have one, right? As much as you might try, it's like trying to get rid of bias. Like, you're not going to do it. But the key is to try to be as objective as possible when you do that. But this idea that, no, we're not starting with a conclusion, based on your interpretive framework, you're already going a particular direction. You're seeing the data through that lens. And that's why I think it's so important to try to engage with different interpretive frameworks, to view the data and to say, does this interpretive framework account for the data points better? But this idea that we're just coming to the data pure. No, you're not. Nobody is. You can't.
I mean, just look at the word apologetics is derived from the Greek word apologia. And it appears in, is it 2 Peter?
I don't know nothing.
You don't know. So I believe it appears in 2 Peter. Always give a defense for the hope that you have within you. So it's so hard to take anyone seriously when they say that, no, we're not starting from a conclusion, when the
posturing is like this.
1 Peter 3:15.
1 Peter
3:15. Thank you. So it's built into the term. Like, you're starting from the position of belief, of acceptance, of this is my conclusion. Now I have to give evidence for it.
Always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. So you're already, it's not even like almost a knowledge thing we would say where you're learning. It's this hope that's inside you. You're already trying to defend. And I would almost call that an experience for most people.
Absolutely. I went to I think this is something that is quite common. I went to a like a Christian discipleship school right out of high school in Auckland, New Zealand, and we spent one of the things that everyone focused on and they kind of drilled into us was developing your own personal testimony and crafting your narrative. And we worked on it and we practiced it and we had a point at the end of the term where everybody stood up and gave their testimony, and we received feedback on what people liked and what we should do differently. So I think there's a focus on telling the story, right? And this is part of your apologetic. This is what I focused on when I made that documentary of Josh McDowell, right? Was just how much his own personal story came to inform his whole method for promoting the gospel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that so often, just to sort of piggyback on that, so often there's this idea among Christian apologists in particular, where they will say, well, we're not starting with our conclusion. What we've done is we've done all this research, we've done all this work, and we've come to this conclusion, right? But the reality is that, as you're sort of intimating here, they've had an experience, right? And when you talk to them, really, it's so few people that I interact with that are speaking to me with any kind of honesty are saying, I was like logicked into my Christianity, right? It was just overwhelming, the evidence from archaeology. It proved to me, like, there are just so few people that say that. No, they say, look, I had a personal experience with Jesus Christ, and I know that he's my Lord and Savior, and hey, you know what? That's great. But I think being able to recognize that, because what happens then is you come then to the data with that conclusion in mind. And so I have a friend, and that's what I was looking up here, but he wrote his dissertation on Daniel and looking at the figure, potential figure of Xerxes II as a potential for Darius the Mede. But he has this note, and I wrote in the book that it's far from objective, right? Because listen to what he says. Most importantly, Daniel was a prophet who wrote infallibly under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, whereas extra-biblical sources for the life of Cyrus are ordinary human writings. Since God was speaking through Daniel as he wrote, the book of Daniel is not to be viewed as an account of uncertain trustworthiness, whose veracity is to be judged by other data, but rather must be the standard by which all other accounts are measured. There's nowhere to go from there. No. That is the essence of Christian apologetics.
And I have to say something, Josh, and Kipp, this is me again, right? Trying to analyze and get into the mind. There are several smart, and I say smart as in like these people are well read. They've read a lot of church fathers. I like to say they've read a lot of material, and they've mainly focused on with that really leaning into stuff. Like I hear people who lean into Lydia and Tim McGrew, okay, and they're like, think these guys are like really up there in the top 10 scholars on New Testament studies. I got a friend of mine, Jeff Tripp, who they're going to be, hearing from soon, who did a critique of Bauckham on his eyewitness testimony stuff. He wrote a book actually criticizing Bauckham's John eyewitness, the Gospel of John. Like so many things. Jesus doesn't even get his own words right in that gospel compared to his own words in earlier places. But the people who are his enemies do. He goes down into the nitty gritty, into the Greek and source material and stuff like the whole textual critic would. But one day he had a medical procedure taking place, so he's laid up for a few days. He said, "What's that book called again?" So I ended up getting him the book, Lydia McGrew's book. And I said, "Hey, read this book since you got the time. Start reading it." He started reading it. We had a phone conversation. I'm not going to go into the details because I want to tease people until they see. But he was just like she just outright says nothing else matters but the New Testament. And like, I don't care about any other sources. I'm literally only caring about this. It's outright coming forward. And these very sophisticated, they write well, their grammar is way better than mine. I mean, I don't even get sentences right half the time. And I'm listening to them and I'm going, you are so driven in I just have to think bias. I mean, it has to be true. You have to have it as your previous video. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't.
It does have to be true though, because of the emotional attachment to it, right? Like this is one of the things that you'll find in common, I think, with most of the more popular apologists is this feature, right? There is a strong emotional attachment at the start. Lee Strobel had his wife had a conversion experience that greatly influenced him in his pursuit. Josh McDowell, similar sort of thing. He had this rotten upbringing as a child and ended up coming to faith through these friendships he made with these super nice people at college, right? I've heard Mike Winger talk about his terrible childhood and just how much love and affection he received as a teenager in church, which led him to Christ. And I mean, you go on and on about how these people have made an investment, a deep emotional investment, that at this point feel prompted to defend at all costs, it seems.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't, like what you're saying is true. Nothing else really matters at this point except for holding on to what this deep emotional attachment that people have that come through faith.
I want to add real quick, Josh, I know you could probably add to this. I feel like, and this is just my subjective little opinion here, that the more sophisticated apologists that we run into, I'll put like inspiring philosophy on this list, things like that, are actually trying to use, I would use this term, negotiate. They're trying to negotiate with the sophisticated, actual critical scholarship out there in some way. Now, they're not willing to negotiate in many ways, but they're trying to negotiate with the more, like, let's go to John Walton. Let's stop acting like ex nihilo, or let's find a way to get a guy who's smart enough, who's playing with real serious academic stuff. He gets stuff right often. Maybe Michael Heiser on certain things, for example. And then there's some things where you go, dude, really? Yeah. Like you really buy, like Michael Heiser lived that worldview. He really thought there's things going on like right now as we speak, and the whole nine. So
no, I was going to say at this point you have to ask the question: who are these people speaking to? Does this become now at this point, at this level that we're talking about, where you're having to develop these sophisticated arguments to maintain this worldview? Is this still about defending your faith to critics, or is this more about standing for those who are like-minded in your own community and defending everybody and everything that they believe against?
Becoming the tribe or the village hero. And we are, in a lot of respects, the local dragon that needs to be slain.
Sure.
And they're defending it. And so there's a lot of people who aren't doing that rigorous work, even on the level of people like Heiser or Walton or whoever it might be that you might throw in the category, because I tend to think Walton's even more than what you see with Heiser. So, but like I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, they're trying to negotiate. Those are the ones that are pretty sophisticated in their approach. But I heard it once said by a scholar, and I'm not going to name names, but they said something that I thought was really interesting about apologetics. You mentioned it's just like for our community. I'm kind of preaching it to my choir. I think that's true. I also think it might be true that they think it's intellectual and they're like, hey, if it's true, then it's obviously logical, rational. It's the most sensical because it's true. Starting with that that experience leading them there. But I really think that the real reason that might boil down for a lot of them, this is me psychoanalyzing, but I do think it's the case, is they're convincing themselves. They're trying to tell that person in the mirror, hey, what you're believing in isn't silly. Put those doubts down. You have the most rational, true belief in the world, and convincing themselves. I did not go on this path to listen to Mike Licona. I heard him once or twice, but he was younger when I first started to get into the scene. It was William Lane Craig. It was Ravi Zacharias. It was these guys. I read The Case for Christ and The Case for Creator, Lee Strobel. These guys were really trying to, and it was my journey at first to know that it was true for myself. Along that path, I started going, oh, I can argue this online, and I can convince others to try and get Christians on the right track, but also stand up to skeptics and tell them why I'm not an idiot for believing in my particular fundamentalist position or something. Because I think they feel that. We think they're idiots, and we don't. I think that there is a sense in which the brain is kind of hijacked, though, to argue for things that, again, to your point of the grit,
But I mean, there's something that happens when you dedicate enough time to a particular subject matter to get a PhD in it. There's something that happens, and it's you realize the vast nature of the data that needs to be mastered in order to understand it. And one of the things, and I'm thinking back to my 26 years as a fundamentalist evangelical, when I was 2/3 of the way through my master's degree, and even before that, but maybe up to that point, I would have felt and did feel at times comfortable walking and marching in to any pastor, any scholar, walking in and saying, I know what all the books on your shelf say, but you don't know what I'm getting ready to tell you. I was a mid-Acts dispensationalist, right? So I could go through the Bible and shout out all these verses, right? This connects to this, and this develops this, and this proves this, and this connects up here to Acts, and this one goes back here to Romans, blah, 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 right? I knew that I knew everything about it, right? And I always give this example. If you're walking down a hallway and you're 50 feet from the door at the end, and the door is open and you're looking into the other room, you can only see this much of the room. It's whatever the width of the door is. But because you're 50 feet from it, your line of sight won't allow anymore. If you take 5 steps forward, how much more of that room can you see?
Out of 50 feet, not much.
Not much, right?
Until you're right up on it.
But man, you've taken 5 steps forward. Think about all the ground you've covered. My God, what you now understand must be immensely more. It's not until you get all the way down in that room and you stop and you turn around and see that this is a 3-story library. All this data that what you have to master has now exponentially grown. But you've gone so much further, but you know relatively so much less. And this, I am convinced, is the experience of people in the church, experience of people online, right? People that haven't had I'm trying to say that I was very, very fortunate to have the experience to walk down that hallway and get all the way into that room. But I realize now how little I know, comparatively speaking. Now, I know a ton more, right?
I was waiting for it.
But there's no way I'm going to be able to master all the data that's in this 3-story library.
You do know what you just did, though. You literally gave a story of Dunning-Kruger. literally told us the Dunning-Kruger effect. It was just a polite way of saying it because people don't like to hear that.
We all have experienced, I mean, I'm sure that you did. I know that I did. On that journey to that room, you go through these stages. Well, I read a book. I read 2 books. Oh boy, and this one came up with something I've never heard before. And it must be brilliant because it's answering all the questions. And there's a really funny way of how people's interpretive models seem to account for all the data points. Because if you don't know what all the data points are, this model can seem to fit it. And that's the issue here. So when you read an article from 1983 and it's 5 pages long and it says, look, here's 6 pages, sorry. And look, here's a chiastic structure that accounts for everything. Well, if you can't read goddamn Sumerian, right, or you can't read Akkadian, or you haven't worked with these texts.
Latch onto that little article from 1983 then.
It's just, there's so much out there. And again, I was as guilty of this as anybody. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, there's an anti-intellectualism out there. And that anti-intellectualism, I think, comes from a place of, I don't want to feel insecure in what I know. I don't want to have to say, these people that have dedicated 15 years of their lives to grad school and have been doing this in the field for 20 years or 30 years or whatever, that they know more than I do about this. And I'm not going to be able to attain that level unless I go do what it is that they do. Or I have some crazy high IQ and I'm in a very fortunate circumstance to be able to dedicate just tons and tons of time to reading. And the issue here, I think, is that bolstering this is the online access that we have to information that we don't actually know is not reputable. And if you can read it somewhere and it makes sense and it fits the data points and it sort of tickles your desire, that didn't make any sense as an analogy. But it satisfies the longing that you have to answer these. It's so easy to grab onto that because you don't know what's in that room. You just know this little bit that you see.
I like that. I like that. Dennis McDonald, I did a recording with him. There was a 4-panel responding to some of his mimetic work. We had Stephen Boyce. We had Eric Manning from the Christian Apologist channel.
That's right.
Yeah, then we had Tim McGrew, and then we had, I can't remember the 4th person. Yeah. And so Dennis responded, and he saw the whole stream that they did. We did a response video later on, but this was while I was in California recorded, and he says, Derek, I'm going to say this very kindly. Dennis is one of the most soft, humbling guys. If you talk to him, he wouldn't hurt a fly. In fact, I hope he sticks around for another 20 years because it's sad. This guy's dad, he's been even in academia, not treated the way he could be, believe it or not. But the problem is what he knows is a skill. There was a time in the 70s and 60s that they were actually training a mixture of New Testament and classicist to learn the Greek and go back into Homer and actually learn this material. New Testament scholars aren't told or trained to read this stuff. This is something that he has a specialty on. And it's a very, very niche specialty, which puts him already on the outside of most New Testament scholars. But he said, Derek, I'm going to say this about them. And I don't mean this disrespectful, but they are intellectual anti-intellectuals.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And it hit. I was like, ooh, because they're smart.
Yeah.
But they are working against the data, the evidence. They're trying to do something rather than work with what scholarship is actually saying here.
You know, it did. And I am benefiting from that. But a lot of people don't have that luxury, right? They have to go out into the workforce. They have families they have to take care of. And they get to a place where it's like, I'm not going to be able to have the money, have the time to go get a master's degree and then go get a PhD. Like, I'm just not going to have time to do it. But I want to know, right? I want to be somebody that is an authority on this. So what do? Well, like, I think people just say, well, if I just read it, you know, the right people, or if I just get under the right scholar on YouTube or something, and then I read what they tell me. Like then I can battle with the best of them, and it can seem that you really have a command of the data. It can feel like you have a command of the data, and you just don't. You've only moved a couple feet down that hallway. You just don't know it, and so then it builds this confidence that then you hear people say when they get in frustrating circumstances, oh, so-called Dr. Bowen, so-called Dr. Davis, right? And that's what that sort of thing.
More recently, a popular user has been accusing me now of what is it? It's my white Western elitist historicist bias. Like I don't even know what to do with that. Like
in what context?
As a means of basically of saying this is what historical criticism is it's an attempt to it's taking a modern method and ham-fistingly applying it to these ancient texts as a means to try and understand them, but can't possibly because it's not getting inside the milieu or inside them. But it's a form of this kind of intellectual anti-intellectualism where you apply a label to someone, liberal scholars.
Like a poisoning the wells.
It's a way of I think dismissing the stuff that either frightens you or you don't understand.
Yeah.
Or both, right? Because it's I just when I read stuff like that, I just shake my head and I'm just like, you just have no idea how hard scholars work to try and understand the literature on its own level.
Yeah.
Right? Which is what we're doing. Like that's maybe that's another way to understand the difference between critical scholars and apologists. Apologists are trying to make sense of the literature, the Bible, within this context that works for them in the here and now, right? Scholars are trying to make sense of the biblical texts in their world.
Yeah.
And you have to, of course, this means you have to employ techniques and methods that have been developed over, hundreds of years, in order to access this stuff, and understand it as best as we can. But at the heart of it, that's the goal, is to try and get to the point of the literature in its own time, in its own place, and to make this accessible and understandable to people in the modern world. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I think surprised me the most when I the deeper I got into my own critical studies of the Bible was just how weird and strange the text actually is, in this world really is. Because from in my own upbringing, in my own modern Christian context, I was always told that this is something that was written for me now, so it's got to be understandable in the here and now, right? And the thing that just blows my mind more and more as I dig into this literature is just how far away we are for here and now from what these texts are and where they came from and what they were, for whom they were written and the purposes for whom they were written. It's it's one of those mind-blowing things.
I mean, comments like this, and I noticed because my computer gives you like a little corner notification, I just glanced over for a second. You will hate it when God has the last laugh. He purposefully put just enough there to make you go the way you want. The game has rules called faith.
This is the other thing that I find, and this could go a completely different direction, but maybe not. I think there's a security in certain apologists, when it comes to this apocalyptic idea. Because like I wrote that chapter in that Routledge volume on violence and genocide and like evangelical morals and how they wrestle with morality in the Old Testament. And one of the things that I talked about is, and I see this online and you just gave an example of it, so many apologists are not only looking to deal with these passages about violence and genocide in a way that allows them to sleep at night. Instead, much worse, they're taking pleasure in these passages. Like, I know you guys have seen this video, I'm sure, but Skylar Fiction and I did an interview with a young man.
Oh, yeah.
And Skylar said, something to him like, so if God commanded you to do away with a small person, would you do it? Or no, he said, would it be moral? And the guy said, yeah, I would do it if God commanded me to do it. Yeah. And he said, you would off a small person if God commanded you? And the guy said, yeah, oh yeah. And of course I put the Kool-Aid, yeah, oh yeah, on top of it. But I mean, think about that. It's this apocalyptic mindset, because look, we're the persecuted group. We're the ones that are suffering. We're the ones that are having to take it on the chin right now. But just you wait. You wait.
Yep.
When God comes back. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of someone that we won't mention their name very specifically now, like a staircase up to when Abraham offered the staircase. Like this person is looking forward to putting his foot on our necks.
Yeah, if you want to get a chuckle, but also see how deep this goes, love letters from Christians to Richard Dawkins. If you have not watched that,
wow.
We'll have to watch it after we're done recording here so you can see. It's very short, but it is the funniest and saddest thing at the same time. You're laughing because you're going, how ridiculous, you'll see why. But there are moments where you're going, these are real people who really wrote Richard Dawkins this, and they're Christians. And yeah, it's like, well, God's hate works for my hate here on this. And even if it's not a political thing, and oftentimes it is, something social or ethical or political or something like that, sometimes it's just heaven and hell. Like right here, they're not happy with the fact that James Tabor literally says that the New Testament gospel is contradicting. There's a problem. Yeah. Somebody's not telling the truth, or somebody's being inaccurate or something. And that person got so mad. You all hate it when God has the last laugh. It's like, what?
Yeah.
What is going on here? Great God,
And that's the thing, like when people bring up like passages like Psalm 137 and the lament and happy as you bashes your heads against the rocks, like and the standard apologetic is, oh look, this is a lament, this isn't God giving this command. Like why this is the thing throughout the Psalms, like this is the intent of God, is to bring about these violent acts, right? This is not an anomaly. It's just a very straightforward way of picturing it. But certainly that's not an idea that Yahweh's standing back going, what? No, my gosh, we would never be so violent. But the thing is, I think that mindset, again, particularly in the apocalyptic genres, you can't help but read through Revelation as a Christian and feel like, one of these days, Alice, and that was a really bad example. I'm sorry. But, I said at the end of that article, even though apologists will say, look, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay, right? There are two things that always stand out to me. One, when you know that it's coming, it can be very difficult, and it was for me, for a Christian to not think of ways to help the process along.
Yeah,
right? And secondly, if you know that your Lord hates a certain group of people and will destroy them if you were to come back right now, it's pretty easy to hate that group as well, even if it's in your own
want
heart.
to destroy them too.
Yeah.
I mean,
the terrifying thing in this is so much of this literature, what apocalyptic literature is it's literature of persecution.
Yeah.
It's written under conditions of duress and trauma. The terrifying thing about this is that this has become reified literature, and now it's this literature that was written under duress and trauma, but now in the hands of the powerful.
Yes, exactly.
That's the scary part.
Precisely.
That's the terrifying piece in all of this.
It's interesting you say that. This is why I love scholarship. This is why I like secular academia. Even my investigation into Islam and understanding the cultural milieu, the history, what's going on in Arabia, the whole nine. There's a scholar named Stephen, Stephen, and I can't remember his last name, but anyway, he's written on this whole apocalypticism in the time of Muhammad and how empires were... The new apocalypticism by then, according to what he's arguing, is pretty much a race for whichever empire is winning is the one God's going to favor and give at the end. So now it's not I'm the weakest and God's going to vindicate us. It's a race for human involvement to become the most supreme empire so that God then favors you and you win. And so that's why the conquest makes a lot of sense in early Islam conquest, and why these nations are battling it out over and over, from the Persians over here with the Seleucid, and then also dealing with Constantinople, the remaining part of Rome that is even there, and the Roman Catholic or the Catholic Church period, because there's various sects arguing. But it's interesting what you just said, because today you can take that to Bush and the things he was saying when we went to the Middle East with tanks, the whole nine. He's thinking, we're the sword of God.
Yeah. No, it was a very interesting, back in, I think it was 2000, it was probably 2005, 2006, maybe a little bit before that. The Society of Biblical Literature used to publish an online forum, and in one of them, they featured I think it was 4 or 5 papers by scholars where they specifically pulled apart Bush's speeches and analyzed them on the basis of the apocalyptic language that he was employing.
Wow.
And just pointing it, directly, pulling the stuff straight out of the Bible, and looking at it in the context in which Bush was speaking, and saying, "What? This is a mission statement. This is about being exactly that. The sword of God in this battle against the forces of darkness."
When I think about what you said about apocalyptic literature starting off with the oppressed, right? And it being this, hang on just a little bit longer, you can make it, survive, don't give in. And then it going into the hands of the powerful. I mean, it really is akin to if a little kid is getting bullied by a 13-year-old, right, out on the docks. And all of a sudden that 13-year-old boy finds himself in his admiral father's battleship, right? And they're looking down from the battleship on this 13-year-old bully, and they're going to blow him up.
Yeah.
It's whoa, Like it's different now, right? You're not the 13-year-old. You're the 13-year-old with the battleship owning father, right? Like this is different. And the thing is, it's that 13-year-old boy thinking, or that younger boy being picked on, thinking that he's still in that position. He actually believes he's being persecuted and wants to enact all the power that he can get behind him. And the reality is, he's the one in charge.
And I'm sure there's several more things that, when we do stop this recording, that come to mind, that we have run into, examples, ideas that just Christian apologetics, and we are emphasizing Christian, but that's because we all three were. Okay. So this does not limit itself. Okay. Yeah. Just so everybody knows, this can go for Jewish apologists. This can go for Muslim apologists. This can go for any and all apologists, really, technically, that are out there trying to defend their conclusions that they're starting with. And Richard C. Miller, when I interviewed him not too long ago in California, he said something interesting that goes along with this intellectual stuff you're talking about with the education. And he's like, Derek, it's not honest in terms of like getting to the grip thing we're talking about in the previous video. It's not honest conclusions. He said, because where they're making their converts are, at Christian camp, a summer camp. They're making them in the local church. There is not this mass conversion as Gary Habermas was confronted by Pine Creek the one time. I haven't watched him in a long time, but on that episode, he's like, Gary, can you give me this list of academics who were skeptical atheists who approached this material and then were convinced? Yeah. Oh my God, the evidence is just so obvious.
Still waiting for the list.
Yeah, like why is that? And it's not that. It's something else.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that I'm 50 years old, so I remember a time before you could just go and buy whatever book you wanted on Amazon. The place where Christian apologetic books were sold was in Christian bookstores. The people who were buying them, the people who bought William Lane Craig and Lee Strobel and Ravi Zacharias and Josh McDowell, these old school guys, they're Christians. Yeah. When they would go on speaking tours, they spoke in churches. Josh McDowell came to Vancouver once when I was still in Bible college, and I went to go see him, and he was in a church. Wasn't at a university. These guys aren't. They are. It's much easier for these guys now, I think, because of the internet and because of the global reach that has provided. But in the old days, it was the ghetto. It all stayed in-house. Mm-hmm. You sold your books in the Christian bookstores to Christians, and you went on your speaking tours at the churches to talk to Christians.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. There's so much more we could get into.
Yeah.
And thank you.